Imagine getting pulled over, and the cop acts like you're hiding nuclear codes in your safe. One wrong move and boom, bright green paint explodes all over him, turning him into a walking traffic cone. But trust me, that's just the beginning. It was one of those crisp early mornings where the sun barely peeked over the horizon, painting the road in soft hues of orange and gold. Thomas Foster, a 52-year-old retired U.S. Army general, was cruising down the highway in his sturdy SUV. In the back seat, strapped securely with a thick belt, sat a heavy steel safe, holding his life's personal documents, military awards, and family heirlooms. To anyone else, it was just a hunk of metal. But to Thomas, it held everything he valued. Not too much to nurture, not too little to show up. The safe wasn't just locked tight, it was fortified. If anyone dared tamper with it, the internal defense system would release a spray of indelible paint, marking the intruder for all to see. It was a precaution, not something Thomas thought would actually come into play. As the tires hummed along the smooth asphalt, Thomas found himself enjoying the quiet. The open road had a way of clearing his mind, letting the chaos of the world fall away. But his peace didn't last long. From the corner of his rearview mirror, he noticed the telltale glare of red and blue lights. The sound of a siren followed, breaking the calm. "Seriously?" he muttered under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He glanced at the speedometer. He wasn't speeding, no traffic violations, no broken lights. Yet here he was, being flagged down by a patrol car. Thomas sighed and pulled over to the shoulder. The crunch of gravel under his tires filled the air. The patrol car stopped a few feet behind him, and out stepped Officer Carla Martinez. Stocky, late 40s, with a scowl etched into her face like it was carved there permanently. Thomas recognized the type immediately. This wasn't going to be a friendly roadside chat. "Morning, sir," Martinez called out, striding toward Thomas's window, her eyes zeroed in on the back seat, almost instantly lingering on the bulky safe. "Exercise," Martinez called. "That's an interesting piece of cargo you've got there. Mind telling me what's inside?" Thomas rolled down his window just enough to talk, but stayed seated. He kept his voice calm and measured. "Good morning, officer. It's just personal items, nothing illegal, I assure you." The smart-looking officer laughed. "Like the type of officer you personal items?" Martinez raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed with the response. "Personal items in a safe on the back seat, that's a little unusual, don't you think?" Thomas felt his patience thinning, but kept his composure. "Unusual doesn't make it illegal." Martinez smirked, leaning slightly toward the window. "Well, how about you open it up for me, just to make sure there's nothing dangerous in there?" Thomas locked eyes with the officer, his expression firm. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm not opening anything I'm not required to. There's no probable cause," continued the verdict. That was the trigger. Martinez's smirk vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. She straightened up, crossing her arms like she'd just been challenged to a duel. "Now listen here," she began, her tone shifting to something more aggressive. "I've seen a lot of strange things out on this highway, but a safe-riding shotgun? That's got suspicion written all over it." Thomas exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "I'm not breaking any laws, officer. If you've got a reason to detain me, say so. Otherwise, I'd like to be on my way." Martinez didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flicked back to the safe, then to Thomas, sizing him up for a moment. It seemed like she might let it go, but the look on her face said otherwise. She wasn't done yet. As Martinez stepped back toward her patrol car, Thomas tightened his grip on the steering wheel. This wasn't going to end with a simple warning, and he knew it. The tension hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. Martinez stood there for a moment, her hands on her hips, scanning the SUV like she was Sherlock Holmes solving the mystery of the century. Her eyes locked on the safe again, and you could practically see the gears turning in her head. Without so much as a word, she strutted around to the back passenger door, her boots crunching against the gravel like she owned the place. Took off her handkerchief and scrubbed her hands, already squat clean of dirt. Halfway to the door, she slipped out of her suit and tossed it to the floor. "All right, let's see what's so important you can't even let me take a peek," Martinez declared, reaching for the door handle. Thomas was out of the driver's seat in a flash, his calm demeanor now replaced with an unmistakable air of authority. He stepped between the officer and the door, his voice low and steady, but carrying the weight of someone who'd faced far greater challenges than a nosy cop. "Don't touch it, that's my property, you have no right," he said firmly, his posture as unyielding as a steel wall. For a second it looked like Martinez might back off. But then her expression shifted, a smirk curling at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't just annoyed, she was challenged, and Martinez was not the kind of officer to let that slide. I think I do," she sneered, stepping back toward her patrol car. "If you're going to make this difficult, I'll just handle it myself." Thomas stayed rooted in place, watching as Martinez popped open the trunk of her cruiser and pulled out a crowbar. She twirled it in her hand like it was some kind of trophy, strutting back toward the SUV with all the confidence in the world. "Look, you're refusing to cooperate, and I've got a job to do, so let's just say this is happening whether you like it or not," Martinez announced, her tone dripping with smugness. Thomas didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step back, his voice calm but loaded with a warning. "You're making a mistake, officer," he said, folding his arms. "A big one." Martinez, of course, ignored him. She wedged the crowbar under the edge of the safe's door, grunting as she applied pressure. "A big mistake," she grunted. "The only mistake here is thinking you can roll down my highway with this and not get checked." And that's when it happened. A faint hiss filled the air, barely audible at first, followed by a sharp burst. Before Martinez could react, a jet of bright green paint shot out of the safe like a firework, hitting her square in the face. The impact was so sudden she dropped the crowbar, stumbling backward as the paint spread across her uniform, face, and hands like an alien attack. "What in the world?" Martinez roared, flailing her arms as though she could shake off the paint. Spoiler, she couldn't. Thomas stood off to the side, watching the scene with an almost imperceptible smile. The sight of the officer, now resembling a walking neon traffic cone, was almost too much. "I warned you," Thomas said, his tone as dry as the desert. "That safe has a security system. You didn't want to listen." Martinez wiped at her face, but the paint only smeared, clinging stubbornly to her skin and uniform. "You what?" she sputtered. This is assault." Thomas raised an eyebrow, gesturing toward the safe. "No, officer, that's just a safety feature. Maybe next time you'll think twice before breaking into someone's property." Martina stomped her feet, still flailing as if the paint would somehow magically disappear. "Not now," Leah said, halting the contents of the beer bottle and placing it in her lap. "You're going to regret this. I'll have you in cuffs before you can say—" Thomas cut her off, holding up his phone. "Just so you know, I've been recording this whole time," he said. "You know, for my safety." Martinez froze mid-rant, her paint-covered jaw hanging open. For the first time that morning, the smugness drained from her face, replaced by something resembling panic. Thomas could almost hear the wheels spinning in her head as she realized just how bad this was going to look. "Anything else, officer?" Thomas asked coolly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Or are we done here?" Martinez was a sight to behold. The woman was lingering around her patrol car like she'd just stepped out of a bad prank show. Her face, uniform, and even her hands were drenched in neon green paint that shimmered obnoxiously under the bright sun. She grabbed a canister of water from her trunk, furiously splashing it on her face. Her employer may have insisted on trying to distract Sean from her trunk, furiously splashing it on her face, only to discover the paint wasn't going anywhere. "Wait, won't this come off?" she barked, her voice a mix of rage and panic as she scrubbed harder. The paint only spread further, now dripping onto her boots. If anything, it made her look even more ridiculous. Thomas leaned casually against his SUV, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold like it was a Saturday morning cartoon. "The eyes of your heart," he said. "That's the thing about industrial-grade security systems," he said, his voice calm and just a tad amused. "They're built to leave an impression." Martinez spun around, glaring at Thomas with paint-smeared eyes. "You think this is funny? You assaulted a police officer. That's a felony." She pointed a dripping green finger at him, the accusation sounding more desperate than authoritative. "Clint," Thomas didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly walked to the back of his SUV, opened the trunk, and pulled out a neatly organized folder. He flipped through the pages until he found exactly what he needed. Turning back to Martinez, he held up a laminated document. "This isn't an assault, officer," Thomas said, his tone even. "It's a security feature, fully legal and registered. Want to read the details, or should I call your supervisor so he can—" For a moment, Martinez just stood there, blinking through the paint that was now starting to dry in odd patches on her face. The laminated document might as well have been a mic drop. But she wasn't ready to give up. "You think this paperwork is going to save you?" Martinez sneered, though her voice lacked its usual bravado. "I know how to deal with people like you." Tier raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, the sound of a car approaching broke the tension. A blue sedan slowed down, its driver clearly intrigued by the bizarre scene. The car pulled over a few feet away, and the driver, a man in his 30s with a smartphone already in hand, stepped out. "Is everything okay here?" the man asked, his phone clearly pointed at Martinez. Martinez froze for a split second, her paint-covered hands hovering awkwardly in midair. "Sir, this is official police business," she said, her tone a poor attempt at regaining authority. The man didn't budge. "Looks more like a paintball accident," he said, smirking as he adjusted the angle of his camera. "Mind if I record, for transparency?" Thomas couldn't suppress the faint smile that tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Feel free," he said, stepping slightly to the side to give the camera a clear view of the officer. Martinez's expression twisted into something between anger and dread. She knew she was losing control of the situation, and the presence of a witness with a camera only made things worse. She muttered something under her breath and stormed back to her patrol car, leaving a trail of green paint wherever she stepped. "You'll regret this." She spat over her shoulders, slamming the doors shut. The engine roared to life and the car sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a very amused audience. Thomas exhaled, turning to the man with the camera. "Thanks for stopping by," he said, his voice casual. "I think you just made my day a whole lot easier." "No problem," the man replied, grinning. "I'll make sure this gets seen by the right people. The guy won't be living this down any time soon."